What steps do you and the team take to make sure that ILAs are trained and prepared to start contributing on day one with the law firm?
Yeah, so we take them through like a 1 week training, kind of on the most pertinent aspects of the law firm's practice area and then state. So when we originally have that conversation with the attorney, the intake call between the account manager and the attorney, we'll find out, what practice area are you practicing in? Obviously, what state are you in? And then maybe what some of the top either tasks within your practice area are, or for that law firm specifically, if there's any maybe very prevalent like documents that need to be drafted or filed, maybe a very specific type of motion that comes up a lot. So we'll be able to take those, items that are going to be the most kind of important for that law firm. We will go through a 1 week training with the ILA, and that training will give them kind of the fundamentals of the practice area within that state and then whatever those top tasks are. So that's kind of on the actual legal work side. And then of course we're also able to train on any specific programs that the law firm might use. So maybe any CRM, the law firm uses Clio or anything like that. Any time systems, if you guys use a very specific program for tracking time so that you can bill your clients, we can usually train the ILA ahead of time on that with some general videos. And then, of course, if there's any email system that you use, any document drafting platform the law firm wants to use specifically, we can train the ILA on that ahead of time as well.
Once someone is trained and ready to go, once they're plugging into a law firm, what does that onboarding process entail? How do we help everybody go from training to actually working on a step-by-step basis?
Once the training is complete, we'll have a call scheduled between the attorney, the ILA, and then the account manager, which of course is representative on our side. It'll be the same person that the attorney does the intake with, so the account manager will stay the same. Usually we'll set up a 1-hour call for the three of us to discuss kind of the initial information that will need to be given to begin the task. So that will be kind of getting all the logins in place. The attorney needs to give login information to the ILA to access the CRM and the billing system and maybe legal research database, whatever it is that they'll need to access to begin assignments. We like to get done on that first call, make sure that everything is kind of in order. Any tasks to start, every attorney is different. Some attorneys have a task right off the bat and they're like, I want you to draft this motion and here's all of the information and here's the template and just send it back to me by Friday. If it's that simple, then we'll make sure that the attorney shares the information with the ILA, that the ILA understands the instructions, and then we'll usually kind of follow up on that first due date just to make sure that the assignment was submitted correctly, that it was done on time, that there haven't been any questions in the meantime. That's the first call. So we'll kind of get into this a bit later, but we can be as involved or as uninvolved as you want, kind of during that initial time period. So ideally what we find works best is if we, on our end, on the DocketWorks side, can be involved in those training calls for the first 3 calls. We find that it takes between 1 to 3 phone calls to really lay the groundwork for all the assignments that need to be assigned in the near future. The groundwork will be done in between 1 to 3 calls. So once those 3 calls are completed with the 3 of us, then usually at that point the attorney and the ILA can kind of take it from there.
Can you talk a little bit about how you provide support in situations where maybe an attorney doesn't have time to provide very detailed instructions for their ILAs up front, or maybe they just don't have those systems in place already?
What we find that bogs down the attorneys the most as far as training is kind of training on, I don't want to call them lower level, but they're not necessarily legal tasks. So it's like, hey, this is our CRM, we use Clio, this is where the client names are, this is how you access the files, this is where you need to log what you did for each client, here's how to extract the information for each case. Those are the types of things that it's kind of the busier work, it's a bit more mundane. And so we're really able to help with those types of tasks pretty easily because there's just so much information on the internet about these programs that are really like widely used. So that kind of goes back to what we were saying before, is during our initial intake call, I or one of our account managers will get that information from the attorney. What programs are you using? And then we can kind of train on those ahead of time. When it comes to the work, the actual legal work, again, we are able to train kind of on the basics of maybe if you're in family law and you're doing modifications and you mostly need help on modifications. So we are training the ILA, hey, these are the basics of drafting a pleading or a motion when it comes to modifications. We lay that groundwork for them. And then of course, they are licensed attorneys in their country, so they already come with that background knowledge of kind of how to do those things. It's not like we're starting from scratch. If there's anything really specific to the firm, any instruction that's really specific, the attorney will usually need to explain those items and show how to do that. But we do try to take as much off of the attorney's plate as possible by just training where we can. And then of course, if the relaying of instructions and the delegation is difficult for the attorney to do, either because they maybe don't know where to start or because of time constraints, having us on those first 3 meetings will be especially helpful because we can kind of guide that conversation, ask the appropriate questions. Sometimes it's really easy for the attorney to answer the question, but they don't know off the top of their heads what they even need to relay. But once we probe it out of them, it's super simple for them to just give an answer.
How you prepare and support ILAs to adapt to different workflows when every attorney generally does things a little bit different.
The good thing about these ILAs is a lot of them are accustomed to working with different attorneys in a couple of different practice areas. So they've kind of gotten used to having to acclimate to how each attorney will do things a little bit differently. Found that they're pretty adaptable. They're not super set in their own ways. They understand that they're entering into a different legal system than they're used to. And while the fundamental aspects of that remain the same, kind of the ethical components of being an attorney and working the legal field, and maybe the tasks are similar, and the more, practical performance of practicing the different components of the law, that remains very much intact, which is good. Doesn't take too much adjustment there. But, like you said, every attorney has their own preferences, their own way of doing things. There's a lot of nuance between each attorney and even the way that they would draft a motion. Some of them have very specific preferences in the way they want things worded, or their standards are different. So I think that 2 main ways that we're able to kind of support and prepare the ILA for that is, like I said, initially we ask in that onboarding call, do you have any specific preferences? Is there anything that you think that you do as an attorney that might be very different from the next attorney that jumps right out at you? And so we would gather those preferences and then, train the ILA or prep them or have them thinking in that way. That's the first thing. And then I think that the second thing is just kind of screening as well for people that are adaptable, that don't mind. And we do that even at Speakeasy, at DocketWorks, when we're hiring. That's one of the questions that we ask our account managers and really anybody doing a position here, because you come from another workplace where things are done differently, and now you're in this new place where the systems are different and the preferences are different, and just the way that we do things may not be the way that you're used to doing them. But that adaptability and that flexibility, it's really a personality trait of being able to keep up with that. And so we do specifically screen for that before bringing an ILA on board as well.
How do we support attorneys figuring out what they should delegate versus what they should keep on their own plate?
During that initial onboarding call, we will go over what tasks you initially would like the ILA to handle. There's a couple different reasons why we might recommend pausing on delegating a certain type of task. It could either be one, because maybe you're asking them to do too many tasks initially, which we find doesn't work for any employee, really across most industries. You want to start with a handful and then maybe pause. So we'll discuss that. We'll ask kind of what is most important to you to delegate immediately? What is bogging you down the most? What's the most time consuming for you personally? And what would you really like to offload? And then we'll focus on those things. There are a couple of tasks that we kind of recommend that you keep in-house. For instance, like intake calls with clients, meaning the attorney has a client that they're going to do legal work for, and we typically recommend the intake calls to be done in-house. But that doesn't mean that the ILA can't do them. It's just something that we recommend pausing, at least in the beginning, on doing until they get kind of acclimated to your firm's culture, what your clients are like, meaning the attorney's clients, those types of things. So we'll really have a conversation. We'll list out everything that you'd like to delegate, and then we can give you our professional opinion on should we delegate it now, should we delegate it later, or should we not delegate that.
Can you talk a little bit about how you've helped firms who have grown with DocketWorks to the point where they're looking to expand an ILA's hours and capabilities, whether that's a single person or even, multiple?
We've had clients in both situations. We've had clients where they've worked with an ILA, usually maybe for like 10 hours per week to start, and then it's gone really well. They see that they can, do the work successfully, they can do it on time, and the attorney finds that they really are truly saving hours in their week from having this person on board, and they've requested an increase in hours. So we've had people go from 10 hours a week all the way up to 40. So we're usually able to make that happen with the same ILA more often than not. So it's just a matter of speaking with the ILA, asking if they have the bandwidth to increase their hours, and then we're able to make the change as soon as the attorney wants it and as soon as the ILA is available to do that. Usually they're prepared to do that by the next week. We've also had clients who have had a full-time ILA and they've just wanted a second ILA. They know the process, they know what onboarding looks like, they know the quality of candidate that is possible to be provided to them, and they just wanted a second one. So we were able to do that fairly quickly. We got another ILA on board for them within about maybe a week or two. Now they have 2 full-time ILAs working for them through DocketWorks.
You were talking a little bit about onboarding when someone is looking to potentially bring on that second ILA. I'm curious what your thoughts are if someone's going into that. Would they have to repeat the onboarding process and do that intake call with you again before bringing on a second person, or are we generally able to just fit somebody in the slot with the information we have?
Unless the attorney wants the second ILA to be doing something drastically different than the first ILA, we don't really need to have another intake call. If the tasks are going to be very different, or maybe it's a completely different practice area, we would probably want to have another shorter call. Usually the initial onboarding calls are about 30 minutes. For this, we'd probably be looking at more of like a 10 to 15 minute phone call.
Can you talk a little bit about how you've seen ILAs partner with in-office paralegals? What difference does it make to have delegation available to people at every level, not just the attorney, but their paralegal as well?
Totally. So some of our clients already have in-house paralegals, and then some of them don't. They're a one-man show. And we've seen this work really well with both situations. So when they do have an in-office paralegal, what makes it easier for the attorney is that that paralegal is typically the one that is able to take on the training sessions with that paralegal. So normally what we see is that the attorney has a full-time paralegal. They're doing great. at what they do, but maybe they're getting bogged down and they could use some help. So in those instances, the paralegal is the one who trains the ILA and lets them know exactly what work they're looking for them to do, how to do it. They can usually fit them in their schedule really well for training. So we've seen nothing but positives when there's already a paralegal in the office. It just makes it easier for the attorney. We have had situations, like I said, where the attorney, it's just them, and so they're dealing directly with the ILA. Really, in those situations, the goal is usually to kind of have that ILA come up to be their main paralegal. Usually those attorneys are in a growth phase where they're busier than before, they know they need help, and they're continuing on that upward trajectory of being busy, having more cases, having more work, but they're just not quite there where they need someone full-time or need someone clocking in person. And so in those cases, they're kind of working from the ground up with the ILA, and they can train them up to kind of be there in the future, hopefully their go-to paralegal.
How do you ensure confidentiality when an ILA is plugging into a law firm remotely?
There's a couple different components to why confidentiality works in the situation and why it's successful. So I would say the first thing is that, as we've mentioned, the ILAs are already licensed attorneys in their home countries. And so they already come with an understanding of what attorney-client privilege is. So those ethics are already built into how they function career-wise. They already know the importance of confidentiality and the legal aspects of it and everything. So protecting client information has really been a part of their professional training before they've ever even come to us, just because of the nature of what an attorney does. So then there's the more, practical components, measures that we take at DocketWorks to ensure that on top of that. So the ILAs do use a virtual terminal, and it's called Rust Desk. It's like an encrypted terminal. So they log in through that terminal when they're working for any attorney through DocketWorks. That's where the documents are stored. That's where they do their work. And at the end of the day, when they clock out, they log out of that system. All documents that are created in that virtual terminal, they're protected through the encryption and they cannot be removed. So we have that measure in place. And then of course, confidentiality is also in the contract that they sign with us to work with us. So they know they can't release any client files, any client names outside of the in-office use, meaning between the ILA and then the attorney that they're working for.
How do you course correct if an ILA is coming to a firm and it's just not feeling like the right fit?
Fortunately, I can honestly say that this really has almost never happened. When we are seeing, though, that an ILA maybe isn't the right fit for whatever reason, we try to really screen for those logistical reasons. I've had bankruptcy attorneys tell me that they really need an ILA that they're good at math and they pay attention to details because they're doing a lot of expense and income declarations and every cent counts. If you're not skilled with math or you're not paying attention to detail and you submit something wrong, you have to start over. So that's something that I can totally see if we didn't know that and we placed an ILA who hates numbers and hates math, because not every attorney loves math and loves numbers. I can totally see how that would not be a good fit and we would need a replacement. So that's why we're super thorough at trying to prevent that from happening during the intake, where we're asking what's really important for you in an ILA. Maybe you need someone with a second language. Maybe you need an ILA who has a very specific schedule. They're available these hours, or maybe they're flexible. So we try to eliminate that from the onset by being proactive as much as possible for screening. With that said, if there is any reason why the ILA might not be a fit for the firm, what we would do is, hopefully the situation isn't awful where they need to be taken off your assignments immediately. We don't ever expect to be the case. So we're able to kind of have that ILA continue working for you, working for the attorney, so that there's no gap and at least coverage of the assignments being done. You can screen for another ILA while the existing ILA is still finishing out the assignments. You can even, during that training training week, that 1 week where we're training the new ILA, the existing ILA can still continue assignments through that time, and then it's more of just like a smooth handoff. And we would, of course, get very specific feedback from the attorney, what exactly isn't working, because we do, of course, try to fix, the issue before we just do a reassignment. But if we're unable to do that, we'll find out exactly what the issue is. That way we can prevent the issue from happening in future applicants.
What kinds of issues might even precipitate that kind of situation?
If it's not those really kind of more mechanical issues like the schedule doesn't work out, those types of things. And those are the things that we would have seen the most, as far as not for replacements being necessary, but for kind of requirements in the beginning that have been given to where someone wouldn't work out. What we would see as far as maybe a situation where it's beyond that and it's more performance based, maybe the deadlines can't be reached appropriately. Maybe the attorney really wants someone who, if they can give an assignment at the start of a shift, they want it back the same day or the next morning. So maybe there's a breach in communication there as far as when assignments are returned back. The quality of work wasn't what the attorney expected. We would try to figure out why and, of course, make fixes, but maybe they don't like the writing style of the ILA, or maybe there's too many small errors or something like that. Maybe the county's wrong or the name is wrong. Not that these things have happened, but those are things where we would look at that. If we're trying to coach the ILA out of that and we see that that's not going to be possible, we would totally take that as an acceptable reason to replace and find a new ILA.
Can you talk a little bit next about what success looks like for an ILA over the course of like the first month and maybe 60 and 90 days after that?
By day 30, the ILA should pretty much be acclimated to the general firm culture. They should be in the midst of how it generally flows, workflow and everything. They should have a really good understanding of the initial tasks that were given to them. By then, there should be at least a few pretty big assignments, if that's kind of the angle that the attorney is going to take with it, assigning these assignments. They should already have been some back and forth with several of these assignments where maybe some changes were made, some preferences were solidified. And so by this time, attorney should have pretty minimal changes to those assignments. That's after about 30 working days. I would say with 60 days, the ILA should definitely be able to complete those initial tasks. Communication should be flowing really well. And by then we should, if the attorney, wants to, we can begin discussing adding additional types of tasks to the ILA's plate, if that's the attorney's situation. The attorney should definitely be saving some time by now. So we know the first few weeks might be an investment of time. Have someone working for 10 hours for you a week if you chose 10 or if you chose 20. But we understand that some of those hours may be spent, training, correcting, all the normal things that you would expect when bringing somebody new on board to your team. By that 60-day time, the attorney should really be saving much more time than they're spending the ILAs. And then about at 90 days, we can definitely revisit adding on additional tasks, even beyond the second phase if the attorney needs to. Workflow should be really smooth. And then usually at this point, this is when the attorneys decide to add on more hours as well if they're going to go in that direction, or if they're not already at 40 hours with their ILA. Usually by the 90-day point, they're like, okay, I've worked with this, guy or this girl for the last 90 days. It's going well. They're doing good work. I understand how the delegation process goes now. It's saving me time. And so we'd like to increase your hours from 10 to 20 or, 20 to 40, whatever the case is.
What have you noticed tends to surprise attorneys probably the most, like once they start successfully and continuously doing this work?
Yeah, so I would say the number one thing that we've heard once the attorneys are fully in the flow of things with their ILA, they've assigned the assignments, they've explained the preferences and everything, and they're just in the flow of assigning and receiving. The compliments that we get the most are quality of the work and then the fast turnaround times. So they really are surprised at how little the ILA actually needs oversight once they get the hang of the assignment, and how little they actually have to go chasing the ILA for anything back. So if there's a very clear direction from the attorney, there's a very clear response from the ILA. If you need X motion filed with X requirements by X date, and it's very clearly defined, the ILA is able to meet those requirements, like I said, with little oversight and on time. And I would say that that's what we're hearing the most from our clients.
If there's anything else you think that a client would need to know about what to do when they're getting involved when partnering with us, or how we do what we do, and any of those things, how they can prepare to succeed with DocketWorks.
I would say going in with the mindset that the attorney may need some assistance in laying the groundwork and delegating. We have honestly found that the attorneys who have the most success either know that they are capable of doing these things on their own, which it has happened. They have been able to just, take the reins, and I haven't had to, interject too much with that, and there's been success. But then some attorneys know that it's not their strong suit to train, or they don't have the time to do it, and they don't have the time to basically navigate those initial calls completely on their own without any guidance. So I think if the attorney remains flexible and being open to receiving help in the areas that they need initially, that really makes for a very successful time with the ILA and with us as well. And one thing that I tell every attorney when I'm ready to pass them on to their ILA, is that the way that it works, and why it's very helpful to have DocketWorks there to kind of go to when there might be an issue or a question, those day-to-day things, like you ask for an assignment to be completed and then they return it, and maybe there's a couple errors and you need to retrain them on how to do something. That's something that the attorney can deal with their ILA, straight away. But maybe there's more of like an overarching issue, and the attorney kind of needs like a reality check, like, hey, is this normal for it to be taking this long for them to get the hang of this? Is this what you guys are used to seeing? And then we can kind of give you like a normal meter check, kind of like, yeah, this is normal. This is what we've seen. Or we can say, no, it's taking a bit too long. That's not really typical. Let me speak with the ILA. So it kind of removes the awkwardness from having to deal with everything directly between the attorney and the ILA. Some things are more appropriate to deal with the ILA directly on, and then some things are more appropriate to come to the account manager from DocketWorks about. So kind of having those differences there, having us as a middleman can be helpful as well. Other things that might be helpful for attorneys to know when working with us. I know I mentioned it before, but I'll say it again, for the purposes here. We can be as little or as much involved as you want during the initial period of laying out the groundwork between you and your ILA. So again, we always like to be involved in at least the first call, but we can handle the first few calls with you as well, just so that everything is smooth and you guys can make sure that just all those little pieces are together, like the login credentials and setting up even that next phone call. Just keeping everybody accountable is really good in the beginning. So we're definitely able to do that. And another thing, I would say the final thing that's important, and I tell this to all of my clients on the DocketWorks side, but also even on the marketing side, it's just really important in any business relationship. If there's any issue that comes up, whether it's small or big, it's good to just let us know at the onset so we can try to address it before it kind of like festers, into like a bigger issue. We are super open to handling all types of issues and nipping them in the bud in the beginning. And sometimes it's just a really small tweak that we need to change for the attorney to be happy, for the ILA to be happy. And so just really good communication when things are good, but especially if things aren't so good, is really important.